Hello everybody, Dokkan Assets here. Today we are back with another animation analysis video. Finally, I am going to be able to take a look at the brand new LR Orange Piccolo and Gohan Beast. Of course, for this video, we are starting off with the boy Orange Piccolo, and later today, you are going to get to see the Gohan Beast video. I apologize that these videos are kind of a little bit late. Obviously, usually I do these like the day after the animations are put up, but not only was I pretty busy around this time, I mean, you know, it is Christmas time and all that. I had family over, I had some friends over the day after Christmas. The data download, because of all those things, in tandem with how big the data downloads were for both versions, took me a very long time to get through, but I'm kind of glad that I did do them before, because they will add a lot to these videos. I feel there's definitely some things that I can supplement in here from the data download. So, besides that as well, the other thing that I wanted to wait for was the boy Giad. Of course, this is the man who does all of the Dokkan anime versus Dokkan comparisons, right? He compares the scenes from the anime directly to Dokkan. And for these units specifically, right, I felt that it was very important to have this on hand. Because not only do I have a lot to say about the both of these units, and of course this video is going to be for Orange Piccolo, but there is a lot that I feel like is really important for these animations to have the side-by-side, even more so than some of the other units that we take a look at, right? Like our monthly Dokkan Fest and whatnot, because of the animation style of Dragon Ball Superhero, and as well, of course, how exciting these units are, and, of course, as well, the fact that with New Year's units, we have never gotten LRs for New Year's before until these two. So we are going to hop in here and take a look at the animations. Of course, keep in mind, I always like to say so for every video, I am not a professional by any means. I'm not a professional animator or anything like that. I just like doing these for fun. And keep in mind, this is just all my opinion. As well, of course, links to everything that is in the video today will be in the description below if you'd like to check it out yourself. And of course, go hit up the homie Giad. He's not asking me to promo him or anything like that. I just really like his videos because he gets these out super quick and he always does a good job on these comparisons. So definitely go drop the boy a sub below. But without further ado, as per usual, let's go ahead and watch these through one time at one time speed, and then we will go through them on the slow-mo. So I feel like, interestingly enough, I actually have a lot more to say about Piccolo than I do for Gohan, right? I think my thoughts for Gohan are a lot more concise, and my thoughts for Piccolo are a lot more I don't want to say like mixed up or messy or kind of hard to describe how I feel about him. But I think that that is definitely like my feeling towards him, right? I really feel like with Piccolo, I am so mixed on how I feel about his animations, because on one hand, I think there is a lot of good stuff in here. There's a lot of good movement, but there is a lot of choppiness in these animations as well, which is really unfortunate to see. And in my personal opinion, I think that the Orange Piccolo animations especially are extremely lacking, which is very unfortunate because obviously the, you know, big transformation for these two is the main appeal of these new units, right? And I think too, another problem with Piccolo, by the way, hydrate or dihydrate. You're going to be hearing me say that a lot because I feel kind of sick right now, like I'm getting sick. So I'm glad I'm getting to film these videos before I maybe actually am sick. But with this guy being a giant form category character, or, you know, just being a giant character in general, right? A lot of the time when it comes to giant characters, especially giant LR characters, their animations tend to get shafted quite a bit, right? I think that this Piccolo would have benefited a lot if he would have had a transformation into Orange Piccolo, and then from Orange Piccolo, after he transformed and you could play as Orange Piccolo normally, right, then he had a transformation into giant form. I think that would have benefited him a lot, and that would have made these animations a lot better instead of the first representation of this character being a little bit lackluster and kind of short, right? I do wonder for both of these guys if they're maybe saving some of their animations, because I feel like if they were going to go that route like I just described, they could have easily just used the animations from the fight with, you know, Gamma 2 at the Red Ribbon Army base. Granted, the fight wasn't really a fight when Orange Piccolo appeared on the scene. He socked them in the face, but they could have supplemented it somehow, right? And then they could have made, when he's giant fighting Cell Max, the giant attacks, right? So, you know, there is definitely some possibility for another version of this character in the future for sure, because he still has some animations that are still left untapped, right? Like that punch versus Gamma 2 is not even present in here, right? Or like when the enemy is punching, you know, Piccolo, I guess it would be Gamma 2 in this case, of course, but, you know, for Dokkan it would be any enemy that you're facing, and then Piccolo, you know, just socks him back. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at these animations though. So first of all, we have, of course, the intro animation. This one is nothing really crazy to write home about, to be honest with you. I think this one is just fine. There's not really a lot of movement here, right? Piccolo's basically just standing there. But I mean, this is essentially accurate to how it is in the actual movie, right? I think that the clothes ripping part where he rips off the Red Ribbon Army outfit too is really, really good, right? Like the absolute detail and all the assets and stuff that they packed into the clothes ripping. I was super impressed when I saw these assets. I was like, holy cow, look at all those shreds of clothing there. That's pretty crazy if I do say so myself. I thought that that was pretty impressive, honestly. And I like how it kind of just dissipates away as well. And then, of course, for the actual transformation into the potential unleashed form, I will say, I feel like this angle, albeit it's, you know, correct to the anime, right? And I like the little hand throw up. I feel like the asset itself just looks a little bit weird, if I'm being honest with you, when he leans down, right? And I also kind of feel like it's not as fluid as it could be when he's just leaning down immediately, right? Like from basically here, right, to then going down to here, I feel like there could be a couple more frames in between, and you're probably going to be hearing me say that a lot, especially when we get to the Orange Piccolo section for sure. But with this, right, I really want to see that section compared next to the original. And by the way, I'm really hoping that I don't get copyright claimed. We're going to have to see what happens with this being next to the original footage, but this is all fair use, so, you know, it should fall under fair use. YouTube, I'm looking at you. Yeah, so with the Dokkan version, right, it just kind of looks like a little bit choppier. And I think the other thing too, right, obviously bear in mind the footage is a little bit like compressed, because obviously he doesn't keep it the normal size and then cut off the sides. He kind of compresses it in a little bit to fit for the comparison here. I think Piccolo feels a lot more rounded in these animations of the actual movie, right? Like he feels like he has a lot more softer edges and a lot less shadows. And I know Dokkan is definitely a little bit harsher on the shadows in this section for sure. I think another interesting thing is with these guys, right? We talked about this a lot. Yeah, definitely Dokkan's, you can see with the side-by-side, is a lot more choppy in general, right? This one, though, is very good, I have to say. The actual transformation into the potential unleashed form does look really good. I don't think there's anything wrong with this, honestly. I think that that section looks perfect. But it is very strange to me, right, for these guys' animations in general. They didn't go as heavy on the CG aspect for them. Like, I think this is all just fine, right? For potential Unleashed Piccolo and Ultimate Gohan as well, and you'll hear me talk about it in his video too, but for Piccolo, right, I really feel like they didn't go as heavy into the CG. Like, you can kind of tell that that's sort of the art style that they're going for, but it kind of gives more of like a 2.5D effect rather than, you know, legitimately being actual CG, right? Like, even though it does look very similar, you can tell that this is absolutely a 3D model, whereas this is 2D assets on a screen, right? They did try and get that a little bit more with Orange Piccolo, I feel like, which we'll talk about that when we get to him. But with Piccolo himself, right, I feel like that they didn't nail as much of that CGI effect, And it's interesting because I feel like with even Gohan, the AGL one that we got originally, I feel like they did a really good job of nailing that style. Yeah, so this shot right here, I think that this asset looks really, really weird personally, right? I'm definitely not really a fan of this, like, come up to this. I understand that this is supposed to be emulating, right? Like Gamma 2 flying at him like this. I don't know. Something about his face just looks a little bit weird to me, and maybe it's just the pose because, you know, you can see part of it is kind of covered by Gamma's hand here, even though obviously, you know, in the actual movie you do kind of see it, but it's a lot more far away before you get super close to it. And again, this asset in particular for sure does not look at all to me like you have a little bit of a 3D effect to it. And the other thing is too that's kind of weird is, doesn't Piccolo still have some lines on his arms, right? It's kind of hard to see because obviously the footage isn't the best quality, but doesn't he not have, are his arms smooth like that? I don't actually remember that exactly. But yeah, so then we have Piccolo teleport away, and you can see that for this section here. The teleport away, by the way, looks alright. I think that that looks pretty cool with the way that he just kind of dissipates like that. Coming back into frame, we have him knee up. And I gotta say, I feel like this section isn't as fluid as it could be, even with the movement in the very beginning here, right? With Piccolo moving like this, I feel like he could absolutely be a lot more fluid. And using these, like, these assets aren't low quality necessarily, right? I don't think that that's the right word to use. But using these smaller assets for a character that is supposed to be this crazy hype and brand new seems like a really big missed opportunity. As well, the quick pose change, you guys know that I am not a fan of that. I always prefer whenever they have a proper transition between the poses. That is just the way that I prefer it. That's the way that I've always preferred it. And it's probably the way that I always will prefer it, to be honest with you. But we have the quick pose change. And again here, just a sliding PNG. No movement here on this whatsoever. They do give you a little bit of a effect there, which is pretty nice. But it is basically just the PNG until, as you can see here, Piccolo finally changes his pose a little bit to then wind up in the punch, which I think the punch does look pretty good, right? Even though there is a couple of pose changes, I think in fluid motion, it's good enough how it is, right, to then, you know, throw the punch forward. And I think Piccolo does look really good here. I like his expression a lot. I think they did a pretty good job with that too. Hydrate or dihydrate. And of course, the way that this is animated as well with the follow through with the punch, I think it feels like it has a lot of weight, which is pretty impressive considering the fact that this is just a PNG and it's not really like, you know, you can't really see it like pressing into his face or anything like that. I mean, with the Gammas, that wouldn't really be the case because obviously they're metal, right? But I think that this still looks really good. I think the punch has a lot of weight behind it. It really feels like it has a lot of oomph as he's kind of chucking him away. The red ribbon base looks really good here too. Okay, let's talk about this shot. So obviously this is a pretty iconic shot for Potential Unleashed Piccolo. Funny enough, this is actually what they used for the super attack for the Piccolo in Legends as well. The Potential Unleashed Piccolo that they added to the game with Gohan Beast. This is the same super attack that they used for that too. And with his face here, it just looks strange, right? Let's go back to the original here. You can see that if we go to the frame by frame, Piccolo's face just looks a little weird here. Like, this looks like somebody's drawing of Piccolo, right? It doesn't necessarily look exactly like him. Like, I think his chin is a little bit too, like, sharp there almost. Even though the footage for the actual movie is a little bit stretched, you can see that Piccolo's proportions on his face are a little bit more rounded in this form. He has a big chin, but it's definitely not, like, sharp to a point, really, right? It's definitely a little bit more rounded. You know, another thing that I'm noticing that's kind of interesting. Okay, so he doesn't have lines on this part, by the way. With this right here, his head is also like a slightly different shade than his chest, and they definitely don't really nail that here. This is definitely the same color all the way through. I know it's like kind of hard to tell, but there is definitely a little bit of a color difference there for sure. But his face just looks very off there to me, and as you can see with him, you know, beginning to grit his teeth in the Dokkan shot, I feel like with his teeth actually like coming together, it looks a little bit more unnatural because they basically just have his, like, face change poses instantly, right? Like with obviously the 3D model, it kind of feels more natural, but with this one, he just suddenly gets the gritted teeth, and then his ear moves up, which is really weird. I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest with you, but then it's to allocate for his face, obviously turning to this position. And I don't think that this angle is also, like, deep enough on the Dokkan one. I think he needs to be tilting his, what would that be, his right shoulder? I think he needs to be tilting his right shoulder forward a little bit more, right? Like, I feel like this shot is pretty close to this one, but it's definitely not exactly where it needs to be the best that it can be, absolutely. With the rocks coming together, though, that does look pretty good. I don't think they exactly nail the effect that Superhero has with that, where the rocks kind of look like they're flying from all around and then sort of smashing together, right? I think they're like so close to getting it there, but it does the good, like it does the job good enough, I think, right? It definitely gets the point across. And then we have Piccolo throw it here, right? Which I think that sequence doesn't look too bad, to be honest with you, with him actually throwing the rocks there. We have, right, it's not like as fluid as the movie, and of course, right, when you're using these 3D models, it isn't going to be as fluid as the movie, because, you know, that is the advantage of CG, right, since it's not hand drawn, right, and it's these models moving around with every scene that you have them in. You know, I guess you can, not like you can make it more fluid, but you understand what I mean, like, since you're not hand drawing it. And I mean, granted, I suppose most, like, 2D animated movies aren't really hand drawn nowadays anyway, but this is pretty one-to-one for the poses here, though, right? You can see that even though it kind of looks like a quick change for Dokkan, it is basically the same here as it is for the movie. Like, it's basically one-to-one, right? With the charge forward, right? The actual, you know, swinging of his arm. His face does look a little bit weird, though. Like, it definitely doesn't look exactly like how it should, which is weird, right? And I know that that might be a little bit of a nitpick, and that's okay if, you know, that's how you feel, but for me personally, I think that these could have been a lot more accurate, and it's surprising to me simply because of the fact that usually they are, right? I feel like Dokkan is really good about getting anime accuracy down to the point of, like, looking exactly like the character, like it's ripped right out of the anime. And that's what's so strange to me, that and again, we'll talk about this more in the Gohan video, but Gohan himself absolutely looks like they just ripped that scene out of the movie, where these look a lot more Dokkan-esque super attacks, right? Moving on, though, this shot is pretty good where he actually throws it forward. It's cool that you can actually see the Piccolo in the background there, because obviously here he's sort of behind the rock, so that is a pretty neat detail. And this is interesting too, because obviously Gamma, you know, like blows up the rock here, but it's kind of funny because obviously when he throws this towards him, right, you can see that, of course, this is a different scene because he's throwing it into the building here rather than Gamma blowing it up. And funny enough, they reference Piccolo flying through the rock when actually in this it's the enemy that flies through the rock. And they definitely do a good job with this explosion, by the way. Look how much that sort of like flies out like that. Definitely very, very nicely done for sure. It doesn't have the exact same amount of, like, you know, you can see the rock sort of kind of floating out there. It definitely isn't as animated in that department, but there's still a little bit of slight movement on it, which is nice to see. Interesting too, that for this they also supplement in some scenes from Cell Max, right, where it's not just when he's fighting Gamma 2. You can see here obviously coming down on the boy and kicking him downward, and then of course we transition to the card art, which will go back to the regular one. It is a dangerous game that I'm playing here with YouTube copyright. But yeah, so then of course we have the card art pop up on the screen. And then we have Piccolo charge this Ki Blast, which I don't think this shot looks that great at all, to be honest with you. I think the asset looks fine, but the actual Ki Ball charging is really lame. Like, there is absolutely Ki Blast that we have seen. Even the Ki Blast in the Hachiyak movie Z Fighters LR looked so much better. And granted, it's a reference to the original source material with that one, but this just feels like so basic to me, right? And comparing it to the original scene, obviously this is like when Piccolo is blasting Cell Max in the head, right? But even so, obviously without Cell Max there, the shot feels so much more empty. And one thing that I think that they really don't get great in the Dokkan one, which is super surprising considering they've been doing a great job on this for a long time, is the lighting. The lighting does not change on Piccolo, really. Like, it's basically the same asset the entire time. It's just the background changes around him, right? And granted, I suppose that's hard to do because of the color that he is in this form. But in the movie, you can see, of course, he starts glowing like this. And Dokkan usually nails that. They've done this in so many animations that we have seen in recent times. So it's kind of surprising that that's the case. And even so, with the Ki Blast, I feel like they're usually so much better about making this look a lot more accurate to the Ki Blast. But this just looks like a generic Dokkan ball, right? Going back to the animation here, though, of course, with this actually hitting him, it basically just kind of explodes. And the explosion does look pretty good. Definitely nothing too crazy in terms of Dokkan explosions. But I do like the way that the Ki Blast sort of explodes around. Right? When it actually makes contact with the enemy, little beams and stuff that sort of fly out of it. I definitely like that quite a bit. And that is a little bit of an original thing because you can see, right, obviously in this scene, it's just him chucking it in to sell Max's head. I do wonder if with these animations too, before we go on, right, I wonder if it is also a case of they were just inexperienced with making stuff for superhero, right, with like the superhero style. It's kind of weird to me, though, that they were so good at doing it with the AGL Gohan, but at the same time, I suppose that is just a simple free-to-play unit with a very small asset, and it's not this complicated stuff. But it definitely feels like they kind of don't have a good grasp of how to emulate the CG style yet. That is kind of a feeling that I get from these, to be honest. Okay. So we have Piccolo come towards the screen here, and I do actually like this scene a lot. I think this is pretty well animated, to be honest with you. I like this where he's sort of like squatting down here, right? I think this looks pretty good. I do still think his proportions are a little bit off, to be honest with you. Also, I don't think his gi was that like wide on his chest. I guess it kind of is. It's also weird because a lot of the scenes that they put together, right? Like obviously this is from the fight with Cell Max when he charges forward like this, right? And this is actually when he transforms into Orange Piccolo in this scene, right, is what they're taking this from. So not only is that kind of why this looks a little bit strange, but also some of these scenes, I think they look a little bit off, maybe because you're thinking, oh, he should have the battle damage in this scene, right? But you can see the proportions just don't look the same, right? And I know, again, it's maybe a nitpick, but when it comes to these animations, and of course, having them be as accurate to the anime as possible, right, as accurate to the source material as possible, you know, you want them to look as good as possible, of course. So with him flying forward, the one thing I will say about this actual sequence here is when he actually does begin to fly forward, I think the transition into this, like with his face being a little bit brighter, is kind of jarring because it is just in one moment. I think they sort of try and mask it with the white little fluff around Piccolo here, right? But I don't think it necessarily does the job as well as I would want it to. As well, right? When Piccolo actually then gets into stance here, this heavily looks like just a PNG asset slapped on a body, right? I think a lot of the time Dokkan does a good job of, you know, making assets that are all like, you know, put together look like they're one piece. But to me, this absolutely looks like they took the PNG of Piccolo's head, right? Maybe it's because it's also this transition into it, right? This looks like they took the PNG and slapped it on the body without the head, right? It just looks a little bit off to me. To be honest with you, right? I do like the effects, though, of Piccolo zooming forward. I think that that is pretty cool, if I do say so myself. Then, of course, we have him fly forward to fight Gamma 2 with a quick punch. Some very nice motion lines on that, too. Obviously, with the punch sort of emphasized there with that little blammo and little air blast. The spin is very good, I will say. That they definitely did a really, really good job. He looks so goofy there, right? Let's compare that to the original here. With this actual, like, spin around, right? This looks really good, right? I think that they have the exact points where they need to, where when he's spinning and then, you know, swinging his leg out, right? I think they do a good job of the pose changes being where they should, and compared to the original, I'd say this still looks pretty good, right? Definitely looks nice. It's not the exact angle, because you can see again, Piccolo is sort of tilted a little bit more in the actual anime. Like, his head is definitely in a little bit of a deeper position, right? Like, more of his chest is visible here, and his face is sort of straight towards the camera here. His arm is also at a little bit of a different angle. Again, those are just nitpicks, but I digress, right? Obviously, that's what we have here. And interestingly enough, the next shot is actually Orange Piccolo from the fight with Gamma 2. So even though obviously, like I was saying before, they didn't use this in the Orange Piccolo animations, it's interesting that they use this for the potential Unleash Piccolo animations. Now, I don't think that this necessarily means that we still can't get an Orange Piccolo with this animation, right? Especially since this is just spliced in here real quick like this, right? We have this scene with him winding back and then punching forward, right? And I think that is also why, too, this does look a little bit weird, in my opinion, right? I feel like, weirdly enough, this almost looks kind of uncanny, I guess would be a good way to describe it. And I think that's because we're so used to seeing Orange Piccolo with this expression and in this scene that it feels kind of off having it be potential Unleash Piccolo, right? For me excuse me, swallow my water weird. For me personally, I've seen this movie 5 times. So, when something looks a little bit off like this, I think I can do a pretty decent good job of picking it up, right? And I knew as soon as I watched this animation, something felt off about it, right? And obviously, this is what it is. It's the fact that obviously Orange Piccolo is the one who actually does this attack. It's also interesting that they string this in, right? Because as you can see, this is just kind of supplemented in here. I do like that they include the red ribbon in the background, though. I think that's definitely a nice perspective and a good way to sort of make this really flow, right? His face also just looks kind of weird here. I think the other problem with this is it almost is like in the animations where he's orange in the actual movie and in the game he's potential Unleashed. They kind of still keep his Orange Piccolo proportions on his face, at least, right? Like his kind of squared off jaw is definitely a lot more reminiscent, excuse me, of the Orange Piccolo look rather than how he looks in the potential Unleashed kind of look, right? I do like that they keep that, though. That's cool with the little bit of the white light sort of surrounding the enemy there. That is very cool that they kind of keep that in. I like that little reference there. Obviously, Gamma 2 gets thrown away. And then interestingly enough, in the actual animation, we have Piccolo teleport away. And I gotta say, this is probably one of the most lame teleports that I've ever seen. They literally just have the PNG fade away and have some lines streak through him, which is so weird because I feel like the teleport from the 12 key looked just fine. So it's interesting to me that, you know, this one doesn't really look that great. But obviously, teleporting in, we do have Piccolo kick forward. And this transition here, right, with him coming in, I really wish they had a lot more animation on this to this, because this shot here, I just don't like it when they jump like this, and I think it's only made worse by the fact that with the movie like this, right, obviously, I guess he does kind of do the same thing here, but it still feels a little bit more natural because of the pose that he goes into, right? Rather than being in a little bit more of a static pose with his arms out to immediately whipping his leg back as hard as he can, right? This pose then goes, you know, right? He is winding up here in the movie, right? So it is a little bit more of a proper build-up. And obviously in the movie's actual frames, right, it looks a lot more natural in my opinion. However, I do like this little bit of movement that they have here to sort of emphasize the wind-up for the kick. And then the actual kick itself is not too bad, right? There is a actual decent impact, I think, and kicking him away is definitely very, very nice. Again, this is another good example right here, I feel like, of watching these two side by side and seeing that they really did not stick as much to that CG style. Like, there is definitely that style present a little bit in the Dokkan animations, but it is absolutely not as heavily present in the animations as it could be, especially considering how some of the art looks, and of course, comparing it to the original source material. Okay, so then here, obviously, it just cuts right away to the actual special beam cannon, and I think this looks pretty good, right? I think that there isn't really any complaints from me on this section. I think the special beam cannon, they did well. The electricity looks nice. It's also weird that they gave him lip flaps because obviously for super attacks, they don't actually get lip flaps, or they don't actually speak, rather. So it's just kind of funny to me that they animated him talking like this because it's completely unnecessary. I appreciate the detail being there, but it's just kind of interesting that they did it. Nonetheless, though, obviously we have it back up a little bit, and then, of course, Piccolo get ready to fire it. And I have to say, this is really cool how accurate they were to the original material here. Let me actually pull this up when Piccolo is actually about to fire it here, right? Look at how close this is to the original, right? With Piccolo squatting down, right? I will say, I do think his head does look a little bit off, but it's definitely not as off as some of the stuff we take a look at until this point. But look at how accurate this is color-wise, right? Very, very cool. Even the impact frames, bro. The impact frames are accurate to the source material here. This is so sick. It is weird, though, too, because he is in a little bit of a pose, right? You can see. I did see this the first time, and I was like, yeah, that doesn't look quite right. And you can see it is definitely not exactly like the original. As well, of course, Piccolo moving himself is also a lot more fluid on the original than the Dokkan one. He basically doesn't move at all here, right? He kind of just moves his arm up, whereas with the actual anime, right, he obviously moves his arm up towards the sky. That kind of feels like cutting corners to me, because it's definitely not necessary to make the animation work by any stretch of the animation. That's funny. Any stretch of the imagination. However, it is a detail that I feel like usually Dokkan is so good about keeping and putting in there. So it's just so weird to me that they would decide to do it this way, right? Even for the little stuff like this. However, this looks really, really good, right? I think they do a very good job of keeping pretty accurate to the source material on this section. The poses are all on point, right? The effects are all on point, right? Very accurate to the original with the little bits of the beam there. Obviously, then we go to the card art on the screen. And of course, then we have Piccolo actually launch the special beam cannon. And I know this angle may look weird for some. Obviously, this is sort of that little bit of perspective where the hand is sort of supposed to be closer to the camera and the body is farther, so it would look like this. But funny enough, in the movie, it actually does look like this. I remember this scene very specifically because I remember looking at this and going, wow, Piccolo's hand looks really weird. And right, it does look weird. It's still in the movie, to be honest with you. I think it does look a little bit better in the movie than it does in Dokkan. It almost looks like he's using his stretchy arm technique and he's making his like hand big in Dokkan, whereas like it looks a little bit more like, you know, the animation technique of, you know, the perspective in the movie. However, I still think both are pretty good. It is weird that they make the background so dark in the actual like animation for Dokkan. I feel like it doesn't need to be that dark. And I do think that the movie does do a better job on lighting on this one for sure, right? Like there is certainly a little bit of an orange tint around the edge of him, but with the actual source material, they definitely do a better job of it, which is strange because usually Dokkan is on it with the lighting. But again, very, very awesome like closeness to the source material here with these in the middle impact frames. That looks so cool. That's sick. Yeah, like look at how accurate this is. Like the frame by frame is just so cool. Oh, that shot is raw. That's so sick. Yeah, this looks really, really good, right? Like this section is fantastic. You can tell that they clearly put a lot of time and effort into this. It is a bit of a shame that there's no shadows like this, right, on the Dokkan version. I'm not sure why, because usually they would add something in like that. But obviously with this too, this is a little bit different because of course Gamma 2 blocks this with his shield, but in this version of course he's actually hitting the enemy. And I think the special beam cannon still does look really, really good here. For sure, when it is actually piercing through the enemy here, right? Like I think that that does look very, very nice. So, funny enough, this final section here is not actually in the anime, right? This is just a reference to the pose that Piccolo hits on the poster, and you have him smiling here. Funny enough, I think this smile is actually reused from the 12 key. Let's see if we can spot that here, right? In the beginning of this. Yeah, is it reused? let me see. We need to go back to that exact frame, right? Okay, so if we go like right here, right? No, okay, it is a little bit different. Good, good, good. I wanted to make sure. His face definitely looks a little bit more proportional here. I think his eyes still do look a little bit weird, but his face definitely looks a little bit better than that shot that we were just looking at to see if it was the same. But this is an interesting way of doing this. Obviously, this ends up being his KO screen. I don't know how I feel about this. It seems very basic, right? Like, I feel like they definitely could have done something more with this, in my opinion. I feel like there's so much more accuracy to be had, or there's something else that they could have done, right? Like, I appreciate a KO screen when they throw it in there, but I feel like this just kind of feels a little bit awkward to me. I don't know. And it's like, why would he be holding his hand like that other than making the reference to the movie poster? I think the big takeaway from these animations, right, for the potential Unleashed side before we get into the Orange Boy, hydrate, by the way, is that with these sections that were taken from the anime, right, or from the movie, I should say, were really good. Like, this whole sequence of the Special Beam Cannon is fantastic. You guys saw as we went through this, right, the details that were packed into here from the original, right, with all of the little references to each individual, like, impact frame and effect and the angles and all of this stuff. Like, look at how accurate this is to the movie. It's crazy accurate. But the scenes where they sort of ad-libbed it, right, where they didn't take it as accurate to the source material and they sort of supplemented it in and changed it up a little bit, like this obviously is close to the original, but it's not exactly there, right? You have the section with Gamma 2 with the kick, right? I feel like this part is still cool, but it's definitely not as, I feel like, impactful as this is, right? For sure. Because obviously it's like changing it up a little bit. However, I think certainly the best example of this is this scene right here where he transforms into Orange Piccolo mid-flight. I feel like this does not do this scene justice. And as well, I think the other big one is the punch here, right? This is just so strange in my opinion, and I feel like it certainly doesn't look as good as if it was on Orange Piccolo, and it feels very weird supplemented in here, because then you have this scene where, oh well, now we need a transition, so then you have this goofy fade where they then fade into the actual next scene of the fight, right? It's kind of interesting to me that the sections that Dokkan sort of makes up themselves and has as original, quote unquote, for, you know, transitional scenes or just adding more to the attack, because obviously they want to keep the attacks around a certain length, they kind of fumble a little bit. But when they reference the original material, they do a fantastic job. I think that's just something interesting to note, right? Whether that is a good or a bad thing, I suppose, is up to you. But I think it's just something worth pointing out for the sake of our analysis here. Okay. So finally, let's get into the scene with Orange Piccolo. I am very excited to take a look at this scene. So, what's interesting about this scene, right, is that with the actual beginning section here, when we have Piccolo up here, there we go, when we have the tree appear on the scene, this looks really good, right? Like, this entire sequence looks really nice, right? I also love, by the way, the fact that they gave Shenron his own special font. I think that's really funny, and I like that a lot, actually, because obviously Shenron has never had like a voice line in a character's animations before, so I think that that's really cool that they gave him his own little thing here. So I want to see this next to the original source material here. Let's go ahead and take a look at this side by side with the movie. As you can see here, this all looks just fine, right? Another thing, I suppose, that can be noted about this too is, again, the whole CG thing. Like, this absolutely looks more like a 3D model. Funny enough, a little bit less in this scene, but you can kind of still tell with Piccolo's arms, especially compared to the 2D assets of the actual Dokkan version. However, what is the transition between Shenron? Okay, so that is basically just like it is in the movie, right? And even the shadows are basically accurate to how it is for Shenron in the movie. And this section also looks really good. I kind of wish they would have added a little bit of a light down there, but it's so quick that you don't really notice it. But it is cool that the light is accurate, right? And Shenron himself is like perfect, right? Like, I think he is absolutely fantastic in these animations. It is a little bit weird that they don't have him kind of glow here, right? Like, he's just sort of yellow. They don't have him, like, more... have, like, a sort of outer glow like he does in the actual anime. Now, this is the scene that, of course, is very important and one of the most iconic scenes for Orange Piccolo in the movie, right? Obviously, him sort of coming to be, right? And the accuracy to the effects here is really, really nice. I will say, this is going to sound really weird, but I don't think it's orange enough. I know that's weird to say, but I feel like with this scene, it's not as, like, dark of an orange as the original. It feels a little bit more yellow to me. Again, I know it's a nitpick, but it is something worth noting about how I feel about these animations. Now, I do want to note, before we get to this section here, right, with him actually rising out of the ground, one thing that I did notice that was extremely strange with this beginning section, and we're going to go to our normal speed here for this, is this lags. This, you can tell, like, immediately after, is so much more fluid than this shot right here. Look at how that looks like it's actually lagging. And that's not, like, this person's phone who's recording this for, you know, the, like, Twitter video, right? Or Akatsuki's, like, computer lagging or something like that. That's just how the animation is. It looks like it's lagging because you can see, like, seconds later when we get to Piccolo himself, it looks like it's the normal frame rate. But for this actual section here, this looks like it's lagging, which is really weird. And we've talked about this a couple times this year, where we've seen animations that kind of looked like they lagged, right? I think the main one that comes to mind when I think of that is the AGL Golden Frieza, the LR, right? Some of his super attacks looked like they were lagging, which is so strange. It's just a strange effect to have in an essay. And as soon as I saw this in, like, the very first promo material, I just kind of was baffled a little bit by that. Because in the actual movie, right, obviously it doesn't look like that. If we take a look at it in the original frame rate, right, you can see it's just fine, right? Like, it matches the rest of the movie. But the Dokkan version kind of looks like it lags a little bit. I don't know. Just very weird, and I thought that it was something worth pointing out. So, with Piccolo here, I honestly think that they didn't nail this section as well as they could have. It's not bad, but I honestly think the card art version of this is better. The actual transition from him going into Orange Piccolo on the card art, I think, looks better, in my opinion, than this, right? Or at least with this animation here, I know what they're going for, right? They're trying to emulate this sort of little bit of, like, darker shades on Piccolo before they actually, like, introduce him proper here, right? But I feel like the way that it's shaded on the Dokkan version compared to the original is like a different type of shading entirely, and it doesn't look as accurate to the original as I would like it to. I think that the actual effects and the rocks and whatnot look just fine, but with the coloring, it's this very weird, like, dark shading. Like, the way that they shade him is just very strange, right? It just looks a little bit off to me personally, right? I think as well, too, his shoulders kind of feel a little bit, like, small. Like, I almost feel like his top half is a little bit too small, which is kind of funny considering he's so big. But, like, I kind of felt like that. And what's weird here, too, is that some of the details that are in the original also aren't in this version, right? Like, you can see a lot of electricity that pops up in here. They have it in the Dokkan version, right? But, like, stuff like this with this little, like, impact frame here, it's interesting that we were just watching in the special beam cannon one that they had this included, right? Like, in spades, right? Like, they had it just all over. But now they don't include it for this, the arguably, you know, more exciting animation. Kind of weird. So then when we get to this section, this is a section that I think Piccolo himself, the actual asset, right? Like, the way that his face looks and the way that it's drawn looks good, right? I don't think there's any denying that, right? Like, I think that it looks really, really good. However, I think that he's not the correct color of orange, right? Like, with Orange Piccolo in the movie here, he's a lot more of this darker orange color, right? He's a lot more, what would I like equate this to? It's hard to equate the exact color of this to something, but it is a lot more of a darker orange, where this one almost leads more on the side of yellow, right? I understand that he is glowing here and stuff like that, and they kind of have in the Dokkan one, like him kind of glowing a little bit here, like this, right? Where he sort of has that glow that sort of dissipates a little bit to have him be a little bit of a normal color, and kind of the glow throughout. But I just feel like the color isn't as accurate to the original as it could be. And I think another thing that is really off-putting about this is because these models are CGI, they don't have as heavy black lines that some other, like, quote-unquote hand-drawn or 2D animation would have, right? But Piccolo, especially with this asset, right? These a lot of like black shadows in there, but then looking at this one has a lot more lineage on it compared to the original, kind of definitely making it feel more like an asset rather than, excuse me, it being as accurate to the original as possible, right? So then, of course, oh boy, this is where we get into a little bit of trouble, and I'm not going to compare it too crazy to the original for this section. However, we get into then this transitioning into this, which is obviously not how the transition happens. And I have to say, obviously, this is like a couple seconds later, right? But it's not exactly right after this original. And this transition to this is so awkward. This is so jarring. Like, this almost kind of feels like an error, in my opinion. Going from Piccolo being there all crazy and orange and glowing to BAM? Hello? Huh? This is just such a strange way to transition from this scene to this one, because again, it's not accurate to the transition of him coming out of this super close-up shot at all. They don't just cut to this like this. And of course, with him being here, right, in the original, the steam is sort of coming off of him in this scene. But they have the key there a little bit, because obviously it's supposed to, ooh, don't worry, we'll talk about that in a moment. It's supposed to kind of have the implication like, oh, obviously this was the close-up of this, right? But it's harder to make that connection when they don't look similar whatsoever. As well, this actual shot here really looks like a 3D model, but not a good one, right? Which is kind of funny to say, considering I've been saying throughout the whole thing, I'm like, oh, why doesn't it look like a 3D model? But I really feel like with this one that this looks like a stinky 3D model. This kind of looks like a CGI crowds in anime type of 3D model, right? We can see, obviously, Piccolo rises up here, and you do have this just kind of fade, which is also super lame, right? Like, the key just kind of fades out. They do have the steam, which they try and take from the original here, right? And then you have Piccolo stamp down and sort of grow a little bit bigger here. I did want to see, how does this compare to the original? Because I genuinely am not sure. So, I guess this is, yeah, supposed to be when he comes down. It's weird that they only have 1 foot in the shot, because obviously here he sort of lands on the ground super heavily. So it's kind of weird to me that that's the case. Oh, interesting. I don't know if that's... I guess that is the same angle. Interesting. I don't know if they really did just, like, want to do 1 foot and they cut it like that, or if they were taking this as a reference. But, I mean, that is way too close to the original to, like, I feel like be undeniable, at least, right? And there, interestingly enough, will be some more stuff from this particular episode in this section of the anime later on in the analysis here. But, okay, so this is when he actually gets giant... So this is supposed to be when he gets big under Cell Max's foot. Interesting. And also... Okay. Yeah, no, wow, interesting. I actually did not take a look at this part yet, so this was almost like a first-time reaction for me. Yeah, this is basically like exactly how he transformed and how it looks in the Budokai Tenkaichi. Even the same pose and everything. Very interesting that that's what they decided to reference for this. So for this whole animation, right, I think everything after Orange Piccolo, like the transformation initially coming on the scene, right, I'm not a fan of any of this, to be honest with you. I think it just looks really ugly. Like, I think that they're trying to go for that CGI style, but again, this is sort of like a Dokkan original animation here. And I don't really like this at all. I feel like this angle is a little bit awkward, right? Because it's trying to imply that he's giant, but he still kind of just looks normal size. I mean, he is clearly giant because obviously compared to like... Well, no, actually, how this would be, he looks like he's just a normal size with the perspective of the ground, right? Like, they try and kind of give you that feeling like he's getting giant with the close-up shot here. And then him sort of backing up. But the perspective of how he is compared to the landscape that he's standing on makes him look like he's normal size. So they don't even do a good job of, like, telling you that this is a giant character. Like, I remember when they showed this on the live stream, and then people were saying he's a giant character, I was confused, because this animation, to me, doesn't do a good enough job of portraying that. Okay, so now we get into the 12 key super. And I do have to say, I think that this one actually looks pretty good for the beginning of it, right? I think that they actually do a pretty good job of referencing the way that Piccolo moves in the original for this section here. Because I think for the most part, right, they do a pretty good job of this. It is interesting that they start from this front shot here when this is basically all from the back, right? But you have Piccolo begin to run forward here, which this is, of course, when he's running at Cell Max. So it's interesting that they go from, and we're going to see it more in detail in a second, but they go from this scene to him running to then back to him throwing the Ki Blast. It's very weird that they, like, put those together in that way. They spliced it together that way. I just think that this is a very weird way of doing it. Obviously, this shot also looks weird because even though this is referencing the original where Piccolo is running here, it kind of feels like a Dokkan original animation because you're not used to seeing it from this angle. And I feel like that run was, like, just completely unnecessary to add in. You could have had this shot and then cut to this one, right, with being behind him right here. So it would be here to here. I feel like they could have just done that and not had to include the running. Like, I think they wanted to include the running just to kind of have the reference to that scene in there. And I would have really liked it if they would have done this angle from the back here. And not to mention, I feel like that would have flowed a lot better if they were going to include the running into this, because now you're looking at Piccolo from the back. So going from looking at him from the front to the back like that does look very strange, right? We then have Piccolo throw the actual Ki Blast, which I will say, the perspective in Dokkan here is really, really cool for sure. And you have a nice camera turn, again, keeping accurate to the original source material with where this cuts, which is very, very nice, right? And him obviously slamming the blast into Cell Max. They do a good job with the lighting on this one. You can see it is very accurate to the original, right? Where his face is a lot more brighter because of the Ki Blast. I do think the Ki Blast is a little bit lacking. It does just kind of look like a little Dokkan circle. You know, I think they could have done a better job with that. But overall, this part is good, and I like that they even included the lens flare there. Again, very nice with the anime accuracy with all of these specific frames. Like, that is just so cool to see. It is weird that he's already this far down, right? Because he does kind of get there already. But it's weird that they didn't have him, you know, looking directly at Cell first after this shot and then having him lean down, right? To kind of cock his eyes at him. Again, another part where I feel like they kind of cut a corner just like they did before we were talking about with the potential Unleashed Piccolo animation. So, now we have this, right, which this effect is definitely very accurate to the original. I think that they do a good job of capturing Piccolo's expressions pretty well with the Orange Piccolo sections, which is kind of funny that with Unleashed, I feel like they didn't do as good of a job. But yeah, these look really good and very close to the original. Piccolo kind of picking himself up here, right, to then smack up Cell Max is not included because, of course, they cut from this to then his card art, you know, being on the screen once again. I will say, I like the fact that they go from this Or I'm sorry, I like the the fact rather. Excuse me, I'm getting too excited. I'm tripping up my words here. That they include this scene, right, of Piccolo slamming down the beam onto Cell Max. However, I feel like this also doesn't flow very well with going from this scene where Piccolo is chucking the ball at Cell Max's face, right, to then they have the card art on the screen, and then they go back, and now he's here, right? I feel like you miss a lot of context in between, and it just doesn't really feel like it flows as well. At least with the animations for potential Unleashed Piccolo, when they had it sort of cut between shots, right? Let's go back to the 18 key where, you know, he charged forward, right? And then they had the little bit of the swing around. And then, excuse me, they had him teleport into the punch that's obviously taken from Orange Piccolo. And then they have him teleport into the kick, right? That flows a little bit better. This scene makes a little bit more sense. But going from this to this almost feels like you accidentally hit skip scene on your DVD player and you're going from this shot to this shot here, right? It's just a little bit jarring, for sure. I do want to see this compared to the original scene as well. Again, I think they do a good job at capturing Piccolo's expressions pretty well here. But there is definitely a little bit more choppiness to this than there is in the original, right? Like, there is a little bit of a couple of cuts here, but I still think that Dokkan's definitely, you know, is a little bit more choppy. Like, they do that okay, right? Going from there to there. But it still doesn't feel as fluid as the original. And again, definitely applying a lot more when we're not looking at it in the frame by frame, because obviously anything's going to look choppy when you look at it in the frame by frame. But they do a good job of this angle. I quite like this, and I like the anime speed lines that they added in the background, because obviously the background is just darkness for this shot. I think that this looks really good with him slamming the beam down, and I actually really like that they included this, because this was one of my favorite sections from the movie, right? And as you can see here, so this is really weird. This is another Dokkan Sprite L. Just like we've had in a couple of different animations. This is supposed to be this shot of Cell Max looking up and going, oh boy, at the beam coming at him. But because of the way that the Dokkan sprites work, and because Cell Max is a giant character, it's just his sprite covering the screen. That's why this looks like this, because it's just his sprite filling up the entirety of the screen. What were they thinking? This looks like nothing for this section, right? I'm sure with a smaller sprite, this will look better, because they try to use characters that are actually fighting the character who they're showing off. So of course they're going to use Cell Max, but it just doesn't fit because you can't see the animation. There's literally like missing animation here. That's why, like, when I do the full screen animation videos, I always try and fight like just Goku, because he's just the standard character, and that way if there's any shenanigans like this, you can maybe see the animation. So I can't even tell you if this scene is in there, because I can't see it, because Cell Max's fat body is blocking the way. But anyway, we then go to here, right, where we have him swing the beam down. And I think this looks really good. Like, this is perfect to the anime, like literally spot on. I don't even think they could have done a better job on that. Like, I love that. I really, really like that section a lot. And again, actually, I will. Dude, is this not the KO screen? Why don't they just have that be the KO screen? That would be really cool, with like the dust just settling. Huh. I guess it just fades to black there. Okay. So we now have the original animation here. And I think this section here is probably where they get the closest to the 3D models, right, for the original. Let me take a quick drink of water. We are almost done with the boy Piccolo here. This is definitely a long animation analysis video. Thank you if you're sticking with me up until this point. I really, really appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the content, of course. It does always really help. Comment, funny orange man, if you made it this far in the video. But let's go ahead and get into this section now. So we have Piccolo obviously arriving on the scene, and this, of course, is from the fight with Cell Max. There is a couple of jump cuts there we're going to see in a second if that is accurate to the original, but I'm definitely not a fan of how that looks when it just kind of changes poses that rapidly like that, right, from this to this. That is definitely a little bit yucky. But with Piccolo moving forward, this section is pretty well animated. I really like the way that he moves and runs in this small little section of him moving here, right? I think that that definitely looks really good. Now, I want to see, compared to the original, right, how does this scene play out? Because when I first saw this scene, I really felt like that there wasn't a lot of impact to the hits, and I felt like there wasn't a lot of movement to the punches and kicks. This also is kind of weird that he just like slaps him like this. So I want to see this compared to the original, right? We have Piccolo moving a little bit. I guess you don't see these like sharp cuts in the poses here like you do in the Dokkan one, because it's so close up to the screen. You're more focused on Piccolo's face, I think, is definitely the way that they kind of mask that. Okay, so this obviously very accurate to the original, right? Like basically to a T. It's weird too, because I feel like with some of these shots he looks so much like a CG model, right? Like this looks pretty close to the original, right, in a little bit of that Dokkan style. However, then when you get to the kick, this is just like straight up 2D. I know that maybe making a foot just 3D isn't necessarily like, oh, you know, but it's still something that's interesting to me, that I feel like a lot of the style in these is extremely different between different scenes in the animation. Okay, so this is basically spot on to the original. Dokkan does do these zoom-ins here, right? Like in this shot, like they do the zoom in with the kick, because that's how it is for this shot, right? Like his kick is zoomed in on. But then when they cut to this, right, with Piccolo duking it out with him, obviously here, right, this does not zoom in the anime, but they do for the shot in Dokkan. I do like the way that they transition between this, where they kind of have the white little smoke effect kind of act as the transition there. Again, like low quality, not low quality acid here, but it's a lot more like simple. It's not as detailed. You have him then turn around to hit Cell Max, which that looks pretty good, right? Again, very accurate to the original. And with this one, I guess maybe they just wanted to make it more fluid between the zoom-ins, because they obviously have him kick behind Cell Max's head here, and it is very zoomed in, so it makes sense why they have it zoomed in for this animation, right? It is also kind of weird with the Dokkan one, because of course you have the stinky sprite, right? And it just kind of has to spin around, and you can't really have it as accurate to the movie, of course. Oh boy, here's where we get into the shenanigans. Before we get into that section though, I do want to point out here, I am kind of weirdly enough, and I know this may be a little bit of a nitpick to some, but it's because I've watched this movie so many times and I enjoy this movie that, you know, I've thought about this movie a lot, right? With this shot of Piccolo and Cell throwing down, I don't like the fact that they zoomed in on this foot right here. And I know that is such a big nitpick, because obviously then they kind of do it right here with it, you know, zooming into him kicking his head. But this scene with him fighting back against Cell Max in this angle and from this far away, and just kind of watching Piccolo struggle, really feels like it's a desperate situation. And especially considering there's like next to no music in this scene in the movie, right? Just watching Piccolo try his best without any crazy angles or special effects, basically just fighting him raw fist to cuff, right, really makes this situation feel a lot more dire and kind of hopeless, right? Which is supposed to be kind of the scene that you're getting with this, because Piccolo's trying his best and he still can't necessarily keep up with Cell Max, right? So by kind of doing these like little zoom ins, right, I understand it's maybe better for a game's animation with that, but I kind of would have preferred it if it would have kept it like the movie, because that's, even just in this short scene alone, gave me those feelings when I was watching the film, right? So let's go ahead and move on to the shenanigans section now. So for this section of the animation, if you wondered when you watched this why this section felt a little bit weird and not very Orange Piccolo-y, that's because it wasn't. They took this from the Goku versus Piccolo fight. And like I said before, when the heck does he slap him, right? He doesn't. This happens when he's giant fighting Goku. So this scene is a Dokkan original here, because obviously this is trying to take from the scene where, you know, he's beating up Goku in the Budokai Tenkaichi. And I think that this scene immediately drops in quality. For me personally, like the way that it looks and the way that it's animated and the like poor angle choice, all of that kind of combines to make me feel like, wow, we went from pretty close to movie accuracy with the scene where he's trying to beat down Cell to, I'm not even sure how to describe it. Like, not disgraceful, because it's certainly not that bad, but just kind of out of place feeling. Like, it feels like someone on the dev team snuck this in. Like, they snuck in their own little reference to this. I don't know. Just a very weird feeling that I get from this. And then the whole rest of this section here, right, is even more shenanigans from the World Tournament. Because then, right here, let's actually go back to right after the card art. It's hard to, like, get this to cut how I want it to. Oh, because it is just a cut. Okay, I thought the card art appeared there. Sorry, I must have misclicked. So again, referencing this original anime episode here. Oops, I'm in the I'm in the search bar. Referencing this original anime episode here. Oh, I'm clicking the wrong button. That's why. Whoopsie. Is why this looks so strange for Orange Piccolo, right? And as well, again, his chin doesn't look as like squared off as it should be in the orange form. Because that is how it looks. I mean, if you look at it, especially in like the transformation, right? Like, look at how chiseled my man's chin is on the Dokkan version and on the movie version. But here, right, because it's not like taking it from the anime and it's not this like high anime accuracy, he feels a lot more rounded. We have him punch down here towards the enemy, which obviously this is when Goku dodges, right? And then, right, Cell Max sort of jumps away. There's the card art. I was wondering where that was. And now we cut back to Piccolo actually punching forward. And I will say, this scene does look pretty good, in my opinion. I think they got this pretty close to the anime. I do kind of wish that the mouth had a little bit more frames, because Piccolo really looks like he's stretched his mouth. I guess they do kind of open it rapidly there, just like they do in the Dokkan one, but the way that his face contorts definitely doesn't look as natural in the Dokkan one, I feel like, because his eyes open at a lot more natural rate than this, and they almost get like longer in the Dokkan one too. Flying forward though, again, pretty close to anime accuracy here. Again, I don't think that his face is necessarily the right shape. This looks a lot more like normal Piccolo rather than orange. But this is pretty cool. I do wish that this shot was more close up. That is another thing. You know what? I didn't even notice that. The fact that Piccolo is shirtless here, I didn't even like think about that fact, because obviously halfway through the fight he rips his shirt off. That's another reason why this animation feels so weird. But the fact that they didn't make this angle close up is not only strange, and sometimes Dokkan does do this where they take it back a little bit like this. It's just feels kind of off. Like they even get the coloring and the motion lines pretty much right. Right? There's not as much like blur on the fist because obviously it's closer to the camera here. But it still feels a little bit off because it's not as close to the camera. Right? We do have then the actual punch with Cell Max. This one, I understand why they did it this way. Because obviously for the actual anime, right? This is when they punch each other in the face, so of course they can't have that with the sprite. They do a good job of as well giving you the same effects as when they punch each other here, right? They do that here with a little bit of motion lines added in, which funny enough they do actually have on their faces. But even though this scene feels a little bit weird like this, you know, I understand why they did it like that, because of course this is basically impossible to replicate in Dokkan. I do like how Piccolo looks here though, for sure. And I believe, oh right, we do have another punch. I was going to say, I believe that's the end. We do have a quick punch to Cell Max here, which looks fine. Not really a ton of impact, to be honest with you, especially since he's just punching at him in a weird angle and a weird spot on the sprite too, like his back of his leg, basically, when obviously this is his face. Does look a little bit weird. And then they actually do, okay, so they do use the punch. Huh. Interesting. Oh no, this is the KO screen. I see. Okay, I was like, wait, why isn't he moving? Very weird, because I feel like even though this, I understand why they have this as the KO screen, because it's supposed to be like he has his fist out after punching Cell Max. I feel like this cutting to this still feels a little bit weird. And it's still a little bit odd to me too that like he doesn't move at all. Like his antennas move a little bit, and you have like the smoke moving a little bit in the, right, like here. But the fact that there's just no movement on him at all is just kind of strange for this KO screen. And that then concludes the animations. So, overall thoughts on this guy. This is a tough one to place for me, right? Especially considering how much I love this movie, right? I really like Superhero. And I really like Orange Piccolo. Piccolo has always been one of my favorite characters in Dragon Ball, right? Like, if I were to give you, like, my top two, it would probably be Bardock and then Piccolo. So, he is a character that's very near and dear to my heart. And I really like Piccolo, and I love Piccolo a lot in this movie. He's like, I mean, I love all the characters in this movie, to be honest with you. But he might be my favorite character in the movie, because he's just so sick in the movie, right? So, this one's such a toss-up for me. Because there's so many good scenes in here, and so many scenes that are so incredibly accurate to the anime and do the source material so much justice. But there's also so many scenes in here that are ad-libbed from other material that then make the actual animations look kind of lacking. I feel like there are definitely more places where they could use frames. They have these things with the KO screen where they like to just kind of have a static PNG at the end, which is kind of weird, right? This scene here with the transformation, the lag still, and also the transition between this to this is still very jarring to me. Again, I think if he wasn't a giant category only for Orange Piccolo, right? Like if he went to Orange and then he went giant, I think that these animations would have maybe fared a little bit better because obviously the giant animations tend to get done a little bit dirty. So, I'm very conflicted. I think overall, I'm disappointed, right? Like, I think I dislike these animations more than I like them, as unfortunate as that is to say. I think that, funny enough, I still like Piccolo's animations for the awakened state better than Gohan's ultimate ones. Which, again, I'll talk more about Gohan in his own video. But I'm very mixed on these, right? Because it doesn't help that I also want them to be really good. Because obviously, like I said, you know, I'm a huge fan of the movie. So, I think overall, my general consensus is that the scenes that are good and are accurate to the movie are very movie accurate and look fantastic. The scenes that are ad-libbed don't look that good, are pretty janky, the angles are not that great, and just the look of the characters in some of the scenes don't necessarily look the best. But I do like what we got because I can still appreciate and enjoy animations despite not thinking that they're the best that they can be, right? Because I try and separate like my enjoyment of it to the analytical of it. Like there are some characters like Tech Bardock, right? I think his animations are just kind of okay, but I still really like them because it's Bardock, right? And of course for this, it's still Orange Piccolo. And of course you can still enjoy animations even if they're not necessarily the best like this, right? So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I knew for a fact I was going to be a lot more conflicted. Well, actually, no. In the beginning of the video, didn't I say that I felt a lot more sound on my opinion on these than I did on Gohan? I feel like I'm flipped now. I feel like I kind of have an idea for Gohan, and these ones now I almost feel more conflicted on Piccolo that I've kind of watched through him. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. I always like reading your comments. I don't always get to reading them right away because usually right after I upload a video or, you know, around a couple of days after, I'm usually doing something. But I always try and get around and read through the comments on all my videos. So thank you guys for, of course, giving your thoughts. And I would love to hear what you think about these. Keep an eye out for the Gohan video, of course, as well. The one other thing that I did want to note with all of this, and I did want to say this a little bit earlier in the video, but I think I'll throw it in here just because I don't want to not include it. For one, I will be doing a video on this, and I'll talk about this in the Gohan Beast video, but it's not going to come out today. That's just the reason why I'm mentioning it here. I am going to be doing a video on the Pan, Goten, and Trunks and Gohan Awakening essay, so keep an eye out for that one. But with Piccolo, right, the one other thing that I did want to note about why his animations potentially are also kind of lackluster is because of the fact that he really doesn't have that many asset sheets, right? When I'm talking asset sheets, of course, we're talking about the assets that make up an animation, right? These are the different pieces and the different PNGs that are put together by the game's code to be able to make the animations that you see on the screen and the animations that, you know, we just watched through. Now, having not a lot of asset sheets, right? We call these asset sheets, right? Just, of course, it's a sheet of assets, pretty self-explanatory. Doesn't always necessarily correlate to a worse animation, right? Having less of these, you know, assets to go around doesn't always mean that a animation is lacking all the time. However, a lot of the time, that is certainly the case, right? Even though it's not the case all the time, it is the case a lot of the time because of the fact that with less asset sheets means less assets to go around, means less movement for the actual characters to have, means less frames to be included in the actual animations themselves, right? It leaves less to actually be present in the animation itself, right? It should be pretty self-explanatory, I think, that obviously the pieces that make up the animation that you see, if there's less of it, then of course, right, it's not going to be, you know, necessarily as high quality or as fluid in a lot of cases as ones that have a ton of assets. I mean, ironically enough in all of this, right, this Gotenks, right, which is the Trunks and Goten, excuse me, that we got, right? The unfeatured unit that's on Gohan's banner. This guy has 70 asset sheets, right? Because obviously I counted these, and of course, you know, I'm, you know, looking at these when I'm posting them, right? And there is a lot of detail packed into these, right? There's a lot of different pieces, right? There's a ton of stuff here. Orange Piccolo, between his 12 key super and his 18 key super, has less, combined, by the way, the 12 key and the 18 key super have less asset sheets than the Goten and Trunks' one super attack does. Now, again, does that necessarily make one worse than the other? No. But I think it is something that is worth noting for the sake of why these animations maybe look like this, because clearly there isn't as much here for them. And again, I don't know if that's just because this is a giant character or if there is something going on in the background else with the dev team or something like that, or if these animations were made at an earlier point, something like that. But I think it's just something that is worth noting in the video because it's food for thought, essentially, right? And it is a contributing factor as to why the animations look the way that they do. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching one more time. Definitely keep an eye out for the Gohan video, of course. Give me your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to hear it. And I will catch you in the next one. Dokkan Assets out. Peace.